Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to call the meeting of the High-Level Radioactive Waste Advisory Council to order. We're going to begin with the roll, and Ed, do you want to go through that?
Yep. Chairman Patton,
Here.
Senator Barta, Representative Nelson,
Here.
Representative Ruby,
Here.
Dave Glott,
Here.
Reese Haas,
Here.
and then in for Jeb Williams, Bruce Kraft.
Correct.
Okay. Ron Hinkie,
Here.
Chris Shilkin, I haven't seen he or Rich Garman. The health officer position is vacant. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. That's as far as I know, unless anyone knows anything else about that. Yana Hennessy, Ken Bean, and Merrick Petrovich. Okay. So we have a quorum.
Oh,
I've got. Did I have that?
10 o'clock.
Yeah, I've got 10. That's what's on there. Yeah.
my calendar says 10.
Yeah, I've got 10.
Okay, we do have a quorum. Just to kind of get everybody a little bit comfortable with who we all are, I thought it would give us a chance to tell a little bit about ourselves. My name is Dale Patton. I'm the senator for District 26 out of Watford City, representing McKenzie, most of McKenzie and 2/3 of Dunn County. I serve on the Finance and Tax Committee and chair the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. My background, I spent 12 years as a McKenzie County Commissioner from 2000 to 2012, 33 years in banking in Watford City, and I grew up at Plaza, North Dakota. And I'm a graduate of NDSU, so go Bison. So, Ed?
Yep. Ed Murphy, state geologist, been state geologist for 21 years with the Geological Survey for 45 years. And about it, that's not very exciting. But I'll point out, because he likes me to do this, best friend when I was up till second grade was John Hoban, who lived just 2 houses down.
What happened in the second grade?
We had a falling out. He took a couple of my toys and everything. He moved from Bismarck. His dad, I think they went, did they go to Ashley or somewhere before Minot? I know his dad with banking went somewhere else and then went to Minot.
I didn't know that.
Okay.
I'm John Nelson. I serve in the North Dakota House. I've been there since 1997. I currently chair the HR section of appropriations. I live in Rugby. So we had the borehole experience was right in my backyard when that occurred, and I think that might be the reason I'm on this committee.
I think that's the reason for this committee.
I think it is. Yeah.
Gary Petrovich, contractor, construction business. But we also live very close to the borehole in Rugby, and at the time. So that hit close to home. So that's another reason why. Here. But just as a caveat, when the whole thing happened, nobody ever announced it in North Dakota. So my wife saw an article in, I believe, Washington Post, which said Rugby, North Dakota, receive nuclear waste from someplace in Washington. So the whole ball started rolling, and we started contacting people, and so it was, that's the reason why I'm here. I took over if I come here. You guys knew her, I guess, she was a member over here for years.
Well, Senator Jeff Barta from District 43 in Grand Forks. I refer to it as the west central portion of Grand Forks. None of my district touches rural property, so that's to clarify that. I currently sit as the chair of Senate Industry and Business and serve on state and local government committees as well. Prior to getting in the legislature in 23 or being elected in 22, I was in private practice, outpatient physical therapy, a partner in those clinics for, I was with the same group for about 35 years and then separated with them once I got in, and currently work for the Center for Innovation at UND, working on SBIR, STTR programming and helping young businesses get started and connect people with research and entrepreneurship. So
What do those acronyms stand for?
SBIR is Small Business Innovation Research. It's STTR is Small Technology Transfer Research. So
I thought you were,
you want me to be
I thought,
so I won't
I
get-
thought you were in human services for a while there because they have all the acronyms that you can imagine.
I should have, my other claim to fame is I lived in Grand Forks for 12 years. I should have pointed that out.
My name's Dave Lott. I'm Director of the Department of Environmental Quality. Been with the state over 42 years. Primarily responsible for environmental protection programs in the state. I can give you a lot of acronyms. I can talk sentences and acronyms without ever giving a full word. That's pretty much what I do. Unlike Ed, I have no friends.
It's kind of T-normal.
Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Yana Hennessy. I work in the so almost 12 years. I take care of the infrastructure at Montreal County, take care of the roads and bridges, try to keep everybody safe. That's
I grew up in Montreal County.
I grew up in Europe, so.
Plaza. Yes, you know that. Really? Okay. Means-
Everyone, career consulting for oil and gas clients, starting with the state. Actually, while I was in the private sector, I also became a certified radiation safety officer, FEMA consultant. And then I came to the state working for Governor Doug Burgum at the time. I actually was first session with the state that Ed Murphy and I worked on the bill together with Rebecca Lear that actually created this doing. That was a fun experience. And then I'm here I am with the Water Resources and Kelly's administration.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bruce Kraft. I'm the chief of our Conservation Communication Division, sitting in for Jeff. My background, I was a fishery biologist in Riverdale, spent a lot of times up in that area, moved down here in 2000 as a biologist, and now I'm the chief of those division, that division. From Towner originally. My dad grew up in Wabash area, Montreal County. Went to NDSU also, and I guess I've been with the state. I can't match Dave, but I've been 37 years, so. Anyway, nice seeing everybody.
We qualify you as a rookie.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ron Hankey. I'm the Director of the Department of Transportation. I've been with the department for 35 years, so I'm the newest of all of us, I guess. I grew up in Center, North Dakota, and graduated with an engineering degree from NDSU and a construction management degree from NDSU. So I've been with the state for a long time, take care of all the state highways and bridges and all the programs that we administer for the locals.
Go ahead.
Marina Gosser. I work for Ed and I'm trying to run this meeting. So speak up, everyone.
Where are you from, Maria?
Mott.
You know Mott.
Hardware country.
Yeah.
Let's go online. Dan?
I'm Dan Ruby. I am a state representative from District 38 in the Minot, Burlington, Des Lacs, and half of the Minot Air Force Base areas. I've been in the legislature since 2001, and I've always served on the Industry, Business, and Labor Committee and the Transportation Committee, and I've chaired the Transportation Committee for 9 sessions now. In my real world, as you see me sitting in my office, I run a garbage company, a waste hauling company that serves the Northwest area. I've heard the name, the Rugby's, the plazas, those areas, Montreal counties, the Stanleys. We provide garbage service for all that area, from pretty much the Montana border in the Northwest all the way to Candu, and from the Canadian border down to Wilton. So pretty much all the towns in between. I also own a couple of landfill companies. One's up by, south of Rugby, which is an inert landfill and a transfer station for the MSW, or Municipal Solid Waste, sorry with the acronyms again. And up about a mile south of Noonan, then I have a MSW landfill with inert as well. But so that's a full Subtitle D landfill that DEQ regulates all of these, and as well as the garbage company and our now our fuel, our petroleum tanks, those. So we deal with DEQ quite a bit, but we don't deal anything with the hazardous. We haven't applied to take anything with, level of T norms or anything like that. So that's probably why I'm on here, is from the transportation angle and maybe the landfill experience.
Thank you, Dan. Mariana, or did I say that right?
Oh, that's
you. Okay. Okay, I see that now. Why aren't you on live up there?
I'm in person here.
Okay. Sean?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. My name's Sean Schaub. I'm calling in here from Laramie, Wyoming today. I am the Nuclear Industry Coordinator for the Wyoming Energy Authority, which is, I gather, why I was invited here to speak with this group today. My background is in geology. I started as a geologist mining uranium here in Wyoming, and in between that role and this current one, I did a number of different things: manufacturing, supply chain, purchasing and procurement, those sorts of activities. So, yeah, been had the good fortune to really dive into this nuclear topic for a little over a year now in this role, but really since college, I've had a large interest in this. So happy to have this discussion today.
Thank you, Sean.
We could move him, since he's on, we could move him so he doesn't have to.
Okay. So good idea. Let's go to our gallery here. If you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Yes, I'm David Strager. I'm the quality. I've been programmed about 15 years. I had about 45 years dealing in and around radioactive material and history as a radiation technologist going into nuclear medicine and all aspects of. Thank you for letting me.
You bet.
I'm Michael White. I'm Marina's.
Oh,
And I work there.
okay. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Dave can come up, sit in case you've got any questions. Why don't you come up, sit at the table?
Ed has suggested a minor change in our schedule. Move Sean up to this time slot. Oh, before that, the minutes would have been emailed out to everybody, and entertain a motion to approval. Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion to second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Motion carried. Yeah, we an appreciation of Sean's time. By the way, you can stay as long as you want, but if you're willing, we'd move you up to the current time slot and have you run through what's going on in the Cowboy State. Does that work for you, Sean?
That'd be great. Yeah, no problem. Whatever works for you guys. All righty. Well, yeah. I guess I've got a little presentation I put together to share so that you don't have to just look at a floating head here. So let me see if I can share that. Okay, is that popping up on your end?
Not yet.
Let me. Good reason for that. I haven't actually selected it. Here we go. All right, how about now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, you got a nice pretty picture of Devil's Tower there. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I figured I was searching for some North Dakota bona fides I could share, which unfortunately all my family's from just south of you guys in South Dakota, but we'll say we share probably an appreciation for Coach Bull for you NDSU fans. So we've got that in common. But all right, well, I'm just going to start and kind of tell you about Wyoming's experience up to this point in venturing into the nuclear industry and kind of how we've approached that and what we've experienced so far. So first, I'll just give you a little bit of background on the Wyoming Energy Authority. Here's our mission statement you can see here, and essentially we advocate, facilitate, and advance Wyoming's energy economy. We view this as sort of a more is more approach, particularly with the demand signals that we're seeing now, which I'll touch on here in a little bit. But we're a relatively new organization. We were started back in 2020, and that happened by combining our 3 existing offices under one roof. And so that was the Infrastructure Authority, the Pipeline Authority, and our State Energy Office. And so back in 2020, those all came together under one roof, and that created the Wyoming Energy Authority. We kind of explain it. You can think of us a little bit like the Department of Energy for the state of Wyoming. And so we're non-regulatory. We work closely with industry and with our policymakers and the legislature and the governor's office. And we're really kind of the point of contact for all things energy in the state. One of the kind of other primary things that we are currently engaged in is we handle administration of a few different buckets of funding. And so let me get to this next slide here. So this is kind of a little snapshot of a few of those. The headline here is the energy matching funds. These were initially appropriated back in 2022. The legislature had appropriated $100 million in the governor's office. So that's where the funds are actually housed. And then he delegated the authority to manage this program to the Wyoming Energy Authority. So we oversee that program. It had 2 additional appropriations following that of $50 million in 2023 and an additional $5 million in 2024, which brings that up to $155 million that we've been running that program for a couple years now. We are just about probably in our last round. Got a number of projects going on. That's a triannual application process, and we've got a whole kind of process to go through, and ultimately a review committee made up of, our director, the director of workforce services, a policy person from the governor's office, along with some other stakeholders that kind of bring in a unique perspective into each of these projects. And kind of the main thing to note here is that these funds are a matching grant. So it's a minimum of a 1-to-1 match, and that can come in through either outside private investment, or if a project has been awarded a DOE grant or something like that, that can serve as the match as well. And so this was really stood up to incentivize innovative industry or innovative energy projects to take place in Wyoming. So we've seen a lot of good projects come forward out of that. So, and there's a few others mentioned here that were from some other programs over the years. The other one to note is our large energy projects fund, which is an additional $100 million that was appropriated in 2024. And that is specifically to incentivize sort of a large impact energy project. So that the way the statute reads there is that the state's role in that project is at least $50 million. And so that's what we've got as far as the funds we manage. So Wyoming, we're fairly new to this nuclear stuff. We, never had a commercial nuclear power reactor in the state. However, we've had a long history of uranium production, and so that's kind of where our interest in this, initially was tied to. And so, kind of began mining in the early 50s, following World War II, to date we've mined a little over 250 million pounds. And have a whole bunch of reserves left on the books here. So we're seeing our uranium mines come back to life, which is really, really nice to see. And then I thought this was just a really fun picture to share. We actually did have what was the first portable microreactor demonstration, which is called PM1, which was sited at Warren Peak near Sundance, Wyoming. It's a pretty remote area. And this reactor was flown into Rapid City, I think in like 14 or 16 different kind of modules, and then trucked to Sundance here at the site, Warren Peak, and assembled. And this reactor ran from 1962 to 1968, provided electricity and heat to power a radar station during the Cold War. So pretty interesting. This has since been, largely decommissioned and removed. But that was kind of our one little piece of nuclear history there for power generation. And so I just wanted to provide kind of a quick overview of some of the big points here of the nuclear industry. This is probably all old news to you guys, but we're seeing a ton of momentum and potential growth starting up in this industry again. Largely it's been stagnant. We haven't really built anything since the 70s, with the exception of, Vogtle plants in Georgia that just came on in the last couple of years. But, a lot of the support is coming from, the recognition that nuclear is a firm, emissions-free, really reliable baseload generation source. And a lot of this growth, obviously is being driven by increased electricity demand that we really haven't seen as a country for several decades, and it's pretty significant growth. This is obviously being driven by data center and AI hyperscalers, but there's also manufacturing growth in the country, and just electrification throughout the economy with electric vehicles and all sorts of different things. Remote mining situations, remote communities that are, could use some electricity. So there's a lot of growth there and a lot of potential applications for nuclear power. We've seen really strong bipartisan support for nuclear energy, which is, probably one of the only things that we're seeing that around right now. The Advance Act that passed last year was a good example of that. It passed 88-2 in the Senate and 393-13 in the House. So pretty significant support there across the aisle. In addition, the public is really learning a lot more and supporting this growth as well. So some recent Gallup polls were just released that showed a little over 60% of respondents now favor, kind of nuclear energy increases, I guess, in general. So, and then, on the finance side of things, nuclear has been, historically a real challenge to finance, high upfront costs, all of that. But we're seeing that kind of shift. There was sometime last year, basically a collection of all the major banks came out and showed their support for nuclear energy development. And then here just recently, the World Bank just kind of pivoted on a long time position that they had held in not supporting nuclear development. That has since changed. And so that's going to, I think really spur a lot of things globally to continue to develop in nuclear energy. And then in the VC world, we're seeing a lot of money come through as well. And this is primarily related to microreactors, which kind of pairs up a little better with what the VC firms are looking for. But So the money's there, the policy support is there. The NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is also, we're seeing a lot of signs that they're evolving to kind of meet this moment of increased demand from a licensing perspective. I'll cover that a little bit later as it relates to one of the projects in Wyoming. And then states are leaning in. I mean, you're seeing this across the country. Texas, just appropriated $350 million to spur specifically nuclear development. Tennessee has done similar things. We're seeing, all over the country, Utah, Idaho. And so, good time for nuclear energy. So a few of the things that Wyoming did to kind of start preparing for this and to kind of get a little bit of momentum built in this is just a little over a year and a half ago, the legislature had appropriated an FTE for a nuclear specific role at the Wyoming Energy Authority. So that's the role that I sit in now, which I think was a really important development. Nuclear is a pretty unique industry. There's a lot of kind of different pieces to this puzzle than exist in others. And so having somebody to kind of really dive in and understand those different dynamics and opportunities, I think was and I'm obviously biased, but I think that was a good move. We developed one of the early nuclear strategic frameworks to kind of guide how we view this industry and the potential opportunities for economic development. That was done before my time, but that was a good collaboration between my predecessor and resources from Idaho National Lab and different Nuclear Energy Institute and all sorts of different folks that helped kind of put information into that. And I lead a statewide meeting quarterly that kind of pulls together, much like this group here, the heads of our state agencies from DEQ and Workforce Services and Homeland and all of those different folks, transportation, along with legislators from our Minerals Committee and others, to kind of keep everybody on the same page about what's developing in the state. There's we take some opportunities there for education, and so that's been a really important kind of development that we keep going, just to kind of make sure all of our stakeholders are up to speed. And then, we continue to work, really closely with Idaho National Lab and other resources around the country to kind of garner expertise and make sure that we're heading in the right direction here. And so I'll get into a couple kind of specific projects here and just kind of provide some updates and kind of how we viewed these. But really what catalyzed all this in Wyoming was TerraPower's decision to site their first Natrium reactor in Kemmer, Wyoming, at the site of one of Rocky Mountain Power's coal plants that they had announced was retiring. That has since changed, but the project with TerraPower is continues to go forward. So they broke ground actually last June and started construction on some of the non-nuclear components, including their sodium test and fill facility, and I think they'll break ground here any day now on their Natrium Training Center, which will house their simulator and will be where they train operators for all their nuclear fleet in the future. So that's pretty exciting. They were recently just granted their industrial siting permit by the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. That was a pretty notable thing. That was obviously the first industrial siting permit that had been granted to a nuclear project. So that went really well. Just in general, we've been really happy with the progress that TerraPower has been making. They've kind of been procuring the long lead items that kind of require a global supply chain. So those have been made, and they're making a lot of effort to kind of stay on schedule, which is, as we know in the nuclear industry, is really important, because that has not been the case in the past, largely. So, and then one thing I wanted to note, that was really important for this project to develop and kind of be, relatively smooth sailing, is they had their team had been, in Kemmer quite often, leading up to the announcement and all the way through to now, and really engaging with that community locally there, but also around the state with our legislature and the university and the community colleges. And so I think that was really important to seeing this to kind of where it's gotten to today. And on the NRC note, and what I mentioned earlier, the NRC just came out here a couple weeks ago and announced that, kind of in line with the recent nuclear executive orders that the president had recently signed ahead of, was it late May, that they are trimming that review of their construction permit down by about 7 months, which is pretty wild to see, and not something we hear often with the NRC being, or the regulator in general being, ahead of schedule. So that's a really good signal that they are making some changes and are able to start to meet these timelines. Another project was kind of spurred, like I said, TerraPower was really the catalyst to get a lot of this momentum going. And then this project with BWX Technologies, they're a company out of Lynchburg, Virginia. And if you're not familiar, they're a really interesting company. They kind of spun out of Babcock and Wilcox, I think around 2015, which set up BWX Technologies. But they've been engaged in the nuclear industry, since its inception. They've been the sole supplier of the U.S. Navy for submarine reactors and aircraft carriers. So a really great company to be working with. And this is one of our early energy matching funds projects. We've been engaged with them for about a couple of years now. And this is looking at siting one of their kind of a microreactor concept to produce not only electricity, but primarily in this case, process heat for our trona mines in Southwest Wyoming. So one of the trona mines, main inputs is heat for the process of taking trona to soda ash. And so this has been a really interesting partnership, and we've learned a lot in going through this project on the reactor design and the economics, and then the fleet economics. And in addition, some really exciting things from my perspective is they've engaged in a series of events around the state last summer, bringing out our local manufacturing community to kind of provide a little bit of education on what can the opportunities look like in this supply chain. Much like you guys, we've got a lot of manufacturers that have been supporting our oil and gas industry and our mining industry. And a lot of those capabilities translate pretty well to various components related to nuclear energy. And so,
Don?
Yes, sir.
Explain to the committee what trona is. I don't know that I'd heard of it myself, and I'm looking at some confused faces here as well.
Yeah, trona is a mineral that basically is what makes baking soda. So you've got it very likely in your fridge or your freezer, but it's also the primary use is it's in glass. It's a primary part of glass manufacturing, but it's used in a whole host of things. But yeah, so that's kind of the overview of it. Southwest Wyoming, down near Green River and Rock Springs, if you're familiar there off of I-80, that is the largest natural trona deposit in the world. And so it's a pretty significant industry in that part of the state and for the state at large. So it's actually our state's largest export. So that's what trona is. So I think that it employs probably around just south of maybe 3,000 people or so in those communities. So it's a really significant driver of the economy down there. And those operators have they're global companies that run those, and they've got various reasons for looking at nuclear power. One of they've got corporate emissions kind of standards that they're working towards, but also they're interested in kind of their energy security and not being subject to big swings in prices as either coal or gas kind of fluctuate. And so this was an interesting opportunity for them, and one that's been, like I said, really exciting to kind of see develop. So that's still in the works, and we'll see where that kind of goes from here. But yeah, so in that supply chain engagement, they actually also awarded a few different POs for some supply chain demonstrations, which has also been really cool. So the one that I like to share is, through this engagement, they actually found a company here where I live in Laramie they actually are a manufacturer of firearm accessories. So they sell like sights and things like that. And so not something you would necessarily think of as being involved in the nuclear supply chain, but one of the things they handle a lot is graphite, and particularly these micro reactors, like this Banner reactor, which is the BWXT advanced nuclear reactor. These high temperature gas reactors use quite a bit of graphite in their core, and so they require graphite machining. And so that was one of the POs that was awarded for a demonstration, and they were really happy with the company. And so we're just looking at ways that these our existing manufacturers can kind of diversify and potentially grow to the extent that they are interested in doing that. So that was a big piece of that project. They've also signed master research agreements with our University of Wyoming. So they're really doing a lot to engage around the state and build this industry here. And then through this relationship, we had the Wyoming Energy Authority last year signed a cooperation agreement to look at building a TRISO manufacturing facility. And what TRISO is a form of nuclear fuel. It's a little different than what is used in the current operating fleet, but it's essentially these think of it as about each kernel is about the size of a ballpoint pen tip. And there's a core of enriched uranium, which uses HALEU fuel, high assay, low enriched uranium, which goes up to about 19.75% enrichment. And it's coated in these 3 layers of carbon and graphite material that basically help contain all the fission gases and things that are created during the fission process. And also it creates a really robust form that holds up to really, really high temperatures. So it was something that was kind of developed early on as part of some DoD efforts for looking at siting microreactors at operating bases and things, and they needed really safe, secure, robust forms of fuel. And so that's been being developed over a couple decades now, and is at a pretty good point in time for commercialization. So that's another kind of site we're looking at. Oh, there we go. And so those are kind of our, a couple of really critical projects that have been moving on for a while now. But as we look at this, and then we kind of look at our strategic framework and how we want to engage and grow this industry, we're fielding all sorts of additional opportunities. A lot of this is around, again, microreactor manufacturing. So we're working with a company right now who's interested in siting their manufacturing facility kind of in the central part of the state. And what these would be are 1 megawatt, largely pretty mobile reactors. So I say mobile, but they're still quite large. They're, think of it as about the size of a shipping container, more or less, but they're about 100 tons or so. So they can move around, but they're still a sizable piece of equipment. But the market that they're looking at is anywhere that is reliant on expensive and arduous supply chains related to diesel generators. So remote Alaskan communities, for example, some military applications, remote mining, things like that. So that's one that we're working with. I mentioned the kind of a fuel supply chain aspect, and that's the TRISO fuel fabrication. And then through all these, as we're fielding these, we're trying to make connections between these new projects and like I mentioned before, our existing manufacturing base to help grow those opportunities. The other really critical pieces, as I see it, of this industry being successful and kind of really gaining some steam, is going to be relying on workforce and supply chain. So on the workforce front, we've been working, our University of Wyoming has set up through the School of Energy Resources. They're kind of broken into their departments or centers of excellence. So they've started a nuclear center of excellence which is co-chaired by an attorney and a chemist, which is a really, really interesting kind of intersection of really important things in the nuclear industry. And so that is growing. They've just stood up we don't have a nuclear engineering program there, but they've stood up some nuclear science certificates. And those can be kind of basically, if any other engineering degree you're pursuing, you can add basically a little nuclear flair to it and get some certificates on that. So that's been a good development. And then our particularly Western Wyoming Community College that is in Rock Springs, which is over by relatively close to where the Kemmer project is being developed by TerraPower. They're really good at, they've been working with, like I said, the Trona industry for a long time and plant operations and things like that for the coal plant down there. So they're really good at pivoting to industry needs. And so when TerraPower came in, they've worked really closely together, and they are standing up sort of a plant operations and industrial maintenance programs that are leveraging their existing curriculum, but then building a nuclear component on that to kind of get that workforce ready to engage in that. And then, Workforce Services is pursuing some opportunities for, apprenticeships and different things. So we're working on continuing to build that out because, like I said, workforce is going to be really important for this all to go well. And then a couple other things just to note, NASIO, another acronym here, National Association of State Energy Offices, I believe, has an Advanced Nuclear First Mover Initiative, which we are a part of, serving as one of the co-chairs of that initiative. And then we are, with Idaho, we're involved in a designated tech hub, which is through the Department of Commerce and the EDA had set up these tech hubs. So we competed for one of those, and we're the only nuclear tech hub. And that's the Intermountain West Nuclear Energy Corridor is what's that's called. So INEC is the acronym for that. So that's kind of a quick run through here. I didn't want to ramble on too long, but hoping I can answer any questions if there are any. And here's our kind of main contact info, and I can provide mine in the chat too if there's any questions that come up afterwards. So yeah, happy to share any or answer any questions if there are any. Or
I had a couple. Could you address the public acceptance and the challenges related to that? And then also how any progress or where you're handling on the disposal of the waste?
Yeah. So obviously that's, you guys being a part of this committee are well aware of this. It's always something that comes up. We've been, the TerraPower project, I guess that got cited before I started in this role, but I haven't sensed too much real concern or pushback on that at a large scale. People understand, the current system of how the operating fleet works, and that your used fuel is stored on site. Obviously there's concern that we've heard about, that's just, well, how can it be temporary if there's no, permanent solution in place? And so that's obviously a challenge, but I think what's really important is just it's going to take a while, but just more and more education. There's a lot of I think misunderstanding out there about the risks around this material. Now, what I'm not saying is, you never go up and say, this is no big deal, right? It is dangerous and it has to be managed properly, but we've got a lengthy history now of doing just that. And we can measure radiation, we can shield it, all of those things. And so a lot of it's been about education around that. On the microreactor manufacturing site that I mentioned has probably drawn the most attention on that front. It's a bit of a different use case, which is what I think is creating a lot of kind of just concern and confusion around that. And so their model would be, manufacturing these 1 megawatt units, fueling them, and then shipping them to where they would operate for a period of 4 or 5 years until they need to be refueled, in which they'd be picked up, transported back to their site where they would do their refurbishing, refueling, and then store that material from their reactors at the site of their manufacturing facility. So there's a lot of questions around the, the safety around transportation and all of that. And so that's something that, obviously this is a kind of a new model that we haven't deployed largely in the US yet. And so they're going to have to demonstrate, right, to the regulator that their unit is safe for transport. So much like a dry cask goes through, being hit by a train and dropped off, onto a spike and submerged in water and lit on fire and all those things, they're going to have to demonstrate that as well. So, but yeah, it has been a big conversation in our legislature as well. So it's one of the primary interim topics that we're engaged in over the summer here. So hearing from folks from the NRC and the Department of Energy and various experts to kind of talk about the safety and all of those type of things. So.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee?
I've got one.
Start with John or Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sean, the question I have is, when we had our the bill that we discussed in this last legislative session, with the micro reactors, I think there was some speculation that the commercialization isn't ready yet. That's a few years away now. In your presentation this morning, it sounds like the timetable is faster than what I might have heard in those conversations, and you're just waiting for it. Do I understand that you're just waiting for the approval from the NRC, and then that would be you would be able to build or can start to construct the reactors?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a there's a lot of these chicken or the egg scenarios in nuclear power. I think, obviously from the reactor developers' point of view, like they've been engaged in their, pursuing their markets and things like that, and they feel strongly that that's ready. The company in particular that we're working with has got sort of an order book started, and there's commitments there. I don't think those have been shared publicly, but they feel confident about that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is going to rely on the NRC. This is not a new. They've been working on this sort of concept for a little while, and now with the additional push to kind of streamline these things, we're seeing that come to fruition a bit, and so they're looking at basically, the concept that these would be manufactured in a manufacturing facility rather than being a unique, civil construction project like a large light water reactor is. They're pursuing those frameworks and setting the stage for kind of what that would look like. So it's kind of, yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see, but they take a while to to build these facilities and develop. So I think a lot of these things are going to be happening in parallel.
I can just follow up. But okay, and well, the reason that this committee was established was for high level underground storage, and we distinguished that in the bill that this so we wouldn't necessarily slow the this new energy possibility in our state either. But you talk about storing the nuclear waste on site. Is that the do you have a process in Wyoming for is that a permanent site, the on storage capability, and that would not get into a more permanent solution at some point in time?
Yeah, that's been kind of part of the situation that the legislature has been dealing with. So we have some existing statute on it's just termed high level radioactive waste. They set up some new statute here when the TerraPower project came basically to allow for, you know, how the operating fleet around the country works right now with storing their site or their spent fuel at the site of the reactor, you know, and it's basically hinges on Nuclear Waste Policy Act, as I understand it, which defines, you know, still has obviously Yucca Mountain defined as kind of the permanent spot, which, as we know, is not the case. There's going to have to be some changes to that, most likely. But yeah, I mean, it is still defined as interim, you know, temporary storage. And so I think what the microreactor manufacturer will be pursuing, we had a Senate File 186 last session that basically looked at that issue of, like, if there's a microreactor manufacturer, they can store the material from only their reactors at their, you know, site, which would be licensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and all of those other standard kind of agreements between the Department of Energy and that. That one went through the Senate. It failed in the House Minerals Committee. So I would imagine that's going to be sort of reimagined to a certain extent for this next session. But that's how they're looking at it, is it would be defined as a temporary storage solution, hinging on, you know, a geologic repository or however the you know, country decides to go as far as that policy goes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a question, yeah.
Murray.
So Sean, I wanted to ask you, did you guys have any private companies or some venture capital groups interested in storing or having interim storage in Wyoming? Because in Texas, they just lost a case in Supreme Court. I believe it was to hold that. And they basically allowed them to make a temporary storage over that. So did you ever deal with anybody like that?
No, I have not. No, not to my. I know, you know, we've been engaged in this kind of discussion around kind of a consolidated interim storage site back into the early 90s, I think. People have been kind of talking about this. Obviously, nothing's gone forward, but no, I haven't been approached by any like specific company to try to do you know, a temporary storage site.
Okay. Mr. Glatt.
Yeah, this is Dave Black. Appreciate your presentation. A couple questions I have. First, was there a regulatory structure that you needed to develop before you move forward with a lot of this small modular reactors, or was the state already set up to handle that based on your uranium mining?
In a way, I mean, the uranium mining is a little bit different. We are set up as an agreement state with the NRC, so we take, you know, primacy over that aspect of things in the uranium mining world. But you know, really, it's, and I can send over the statute that was written around the TerraPower project, but it's pretty simple, really. But that's largely all that was required. And there's, you know, our Industrial Siting Act, which plays into that. But largely what the state did was say, you know, the NRC is always going to be, well, we think most likely always going to be the regulator on, you know, nuclear generating assets. So they'll be the primary regulator on those nuclear parts of that. Now the state does have, you know, framework around, you know, air and water stuff, but how that's been set up is basically, we don't want to duplicate anything that's already required out of a very robust NRC process. So really, you know, again, as I understand it, the only real new piece of statute that was written was basically allowing the spent nuclear fuel from the reactor to be stored, you know, at the site of the reactor.
Thank you. The other question I have is, why small modular reactors, especially with the data centers coming in? They are big energy draws. And
Yep.
Is any consideration going with something like a 1,500 megawatt facility, so you have one facility versus a bunch of small ones in the state?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's sort of a number of reasons for the differences there. Like I think, my personal opinion, I think there will be applications for all of them to fit in. Wyoming's in a bit of a unique situation because we're already a pretty significant exporter of electricity. I think we export like 12 times what we actually consume here in the state. I think just more like 300 megawatt units is primarily a factor of risk and cost, right? So it's just a significant reduction in the risk that, say, a utility or someone else is taking. And that's, driven by the idea with some of these SMRs is that you'd have modular components that are factory fabricated, transported to site. So you're reducing a lot of your big civil work that's happening on site and reducing time and money and all of that. And so I think that's why, there's a big focus on those, and then they can be sort of scaled up in those units, which pairs pretty well. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing like the Palisades plant in Michigan there being, Holtec is working on restarting that now, which would be the first restart of a shutdown nuclear reactor in the country's history. And that is, largely being driven by that demand. And that's a big reactor. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, I know particularly like Texas just had an announcement of a major data center development, which is something like, if I remember right, 12 gigawatts or something like that, which, to me, to your point, would make more sense to do that in larger units.
Continue.
Last question. I see a lot of states getting into the small modular reactors, and so we'll see a lot more of those coming online, I believe. I also see the federal government divesting from a lot of the regulatory oversight and putting the responsibility on the states. Is this, if the NRC kind of says, hey, there's too many of them, we can't keep track of them, we want the states to, maybe it's more of just a statement rather than a question. I see that as a concern moving forward, is that we have the capacity to be able to regulate all of this.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's something that we, really haven't had to deal with. The NRC has been set up, and, and this is kind of part of the big pivot that they're trying to engage in right now is, basically for the existence of the NRC, they've been set up to basically just manage and regulate, large light water reactors. And with all this, what is not necessarily new technology, but, new commercialization and deployment of this technology, they are going to need to, and what I've kind of been seen stated is they're sort of drawing down resources in certain areas and allocating, bulking up resources in the areas of advanced reactor licensing and those type of things. So I don't know. I'm an optimist. I'm hoping that they see the trend and kind of staff up to be able to handle that. And so far it's been going well, but I mean, to your point, we don't have, dozens of new reactors in the queue right now. There's a couple, and I think they'll learn a lot from that experience. But yeah, it's going to have to be something that is addressed. Because I don't, as I've talked, there's been kind of a push. You've probably seen some lawsuits out there that are kind of saying, hey, some of these micro reactors are so small, they shouldn't even be under the NRC's, purview, and are looking at like, hey, can states individually manage these type of things? And as I've talked to industry folks, they're like, I mean, I think the intentions are good, but it's like, well, then we have 50 different regulators instead of one. And is that any more, and then obviously the states have to develop the capacity to be able to manage that stuff. And so I don't know. I don't think things are going that route, but I could be surprised.
I have another question.
Yeah, Merrick, go ahead.
So, what is the timetable for TerraPower? I just talked to somebody who works with these companies as far as securing capital and money, and I don't want to name the person, but from what he told me, it's, the first ones, and I think NuScale should be about the first one who might have operational one. And that would be sometimes in 2030. He said this is something that we're talking about, rolling it out and commercializing this technology would be probably in 20 years maybe. So we're not talking about something that's gonna happen next year or the year after on a large scale. Some might be popping up in about 5, 6 years. And we know that if you look at NuScale, I'm not that familiar with TerraPower, but they have postponed their project, quite a few times, and they about doubled or tripled the price of it within the last 10 years. So, is that something you guys are worried about? Because it seems like this is kind of a hype that's going on now. We don't really know yet, how it's going to work. It hasn't been tested. From my research, we have 3 of them working currently. I think 1 is in Russia and 2 in China. So and there's also other technologies. I think China is coming up with the first, and it's a ginormous plan. It should be finished in 2029 for thorium. Is that something you guys are looking into also? Some alternatives to the high level, to reactors that produce high level waste?
Yeah, I think I haven't really been engaged in any of the thorium companies. I think it's definitely interesting. There's some kind of different supply chain challenges with that. But back to the TerraPower question on timing. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's always a concern in the nuclear industry, and that's what's so important about this project for the industry at large is, we're fairly certain it's going to come in over budget, right? First of a kind, like that's sort of to be expected. The timing though, is really important to kind of get right. And so, we continue to evaluate what's happening there. And so far, I mean, again, knock on wood, but so far the signals are good. Like I said, they've made their supply chain commitments as far as long lead items, pressure vessel and the vessel head, and all of these kind of big forgings and stuff that need to be largely procured, in South Korea and some of those places. So those have been made, and as I understand, are actually getting into fabrication here soon. The other critical piece in getting this off the ground on time is the fuel supply. So one thing you'll hear about is a lot of these advanced reactors are using the HALEU fuel that I mentioned, the high assay low enriched uranium, and that is a supply chain that domestically does not exist yet. And this is kind of one of those classic chicken or the egg things where we know we need this, but the demand isn't quite there yet. But so we're in this kind of in between phase. So TerraPower was not, they've been engaged in kind of all the domestic HALEU availability programs that DOE is running with, and they've got some secured through there. I think there's opportunities to do some different things through DOE, but they're really kind of spreading out their commitments there to make sure that they can hit that. And so they'll continue that domestic kind of push for the long term to get this set up. But in the meantime, they've partnered with a company called ASP Isotopes, who does a lot of isotope work in several different countries, but one of which that they're big in is in South Africa. And that's where they're going to get the HALEU for their first core. So assuming, that stuff continues at a good pace, that'll be one of the defining things is that HALEU availability. But they've been working on, it's a metallized fuel type. And so another thing you have to look at is if the fuel has actually been qualified and is going to be approved by the NRC. And so this particular fuel has been, studied and worked on for quite a while now. And so they're pretty confident that that's going to, go through and be fine. They're working with Framatome, who's a really great nuclear company that makes fuel for the operating fleet all over the world. And so they're understanding that really well, and that's progressing nicely. And like I said, the neat thing has been, we're seeing dirt moving and stuff being built right now. So that's started last summer. And then, like I said, the NRC, the other kind of risk on time has generally been the regulator. And so we saw that with Vogel, which they went through a little bit different licensing pathway, which is called Part 52, which is a combined license permit, which combines your operating license and your construction license. And there's a bunch of intricacies there that can really kind of affect the timing. So if there's a change that needs to happen from an incomplete design, it has to go through a whole bunch of steps to get changed. And so that's, one of the factors that contributed to seeing that go so long and so over budget. So seeing the NRC now say that, hey, we're 7 months ahead of schedule in getting your construction permit licensed, is a good signal to us as well. So yeah, all that being said, their timeline still is to be 2030 finished. So that's a pretty short timeline in the nuclear world, but they're making good progress on that. And again, the other thing to note is, like a lot of these companies that are popping up are relatively new. TerraPower has been around since I think 2006 or 2008. So they've been working with a large team of engineers on their design and stuff for quite some time. So they're pretty mature in that sense. And then, the financial backing is also an issue with nuclear. And TerraPower just recently raised another $650 million. Obviously they've got, Mr. Gates as kind of one of the primary backers, but one of the significant developments to me in this last round was that NVIDIA's investment arm was involved in that raise. And so you're seeing, chips manufacturers and things like that really see the potential in these projects. So all that being said, I think, I'm still remaining optimistic about this timeline. And I think we've had as an industry a long time to think about, all the things that have kind of hamstrung us in the past. And so hopefully, we're making changes and developing that and going to stay on schedule.
Further questions?
Sure. Sean, Ed Murphy, I've got a couple of questions. I was going to mention back in 2018, we were tasked with drafting a bill that became our high-level radioactive waste law. Dave Glott and I are our attorneys. And there were 13 states that had radioactive waste high-level law and rules, and we were told to follow Wyoming as closely as we could. And so our law is really drafted after years for the most part. Although this council, we took that out of Mississippi's law that they had developed. But a couple of questions for the 155 million that you mentioned that for energy grants. Mm-hmm. Offhand, is most of that gone to private companies? Has it gone to university research, or how's that split up?
It's been a mix. There's been, a handful of projects through University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources. Well, I don't know if most, several of those are engaged with an industry partner though on their side as well. And then I'm trying to think, I think mostly they'd be, private industry, or, companies, businesses. So I think that's it, and it's been kind of across the board from, sort of research, prototyping kind of projects and commercial. So, that was one of the challenges with that program is the statutory language around, what that could be used for was really quite broad. So we've seen, all sorts of different things come forward with that.
And then just one other, I'm curious for uranium mining, what percentage in Wyoming is in situ, or if any is?
All of it. Yeah.
It is.
All of it's in situ right now. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions for Sean? Seeing none, thank you, Sean. You're welcome to stick around if you want to, but you're also, in the interest of saving your time, if you have other things, go ahead. You can log out if it's up to you. So.
All right. Well, appreciate it, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, a little housekeeping, restrooms are out this door and around the corner to the left. There is coffee through the door on the right. We are going to break for lunch sometime between 11:30 and 11:45, depending on how long our discussion goes on the next topic. So we're going to move on to our our 10:10 agenda item. Recent legislation related to advanced nuclear power study. I want to start with Senate Bill 2159 first because that deals with the State Energy Research Center. And we have that bill up on the screen right now, I believe. We just have to move Dan Ruby's face over a little bit so we can read it.
Scroll down to 2159 is the second one. There you go.
Okay. This bill basically reauthorized our State Energy Research Center, authorized that to conduct exploratory, transformational, innovative research that advances future energy opportunities. It removed the restriction to study nuclear energy, I believe.
Go to the next second part of that.
As you can see, carry out select the research topics and projects to be pursued, enter contracts and agreements with other institutions, enter contracts and agreements with federal, private, nonprofit, and accept donation contributions and gifts to carry this out. Must be approved by the Industrial Commission and conducted in consultation with us. So, and it may conduct research related to above ground. Is there any questions related to this bill? This is basically, I would call it an enabling bill that then reinforces what we have in 1025.
Yes, I have a couple of questions about it. So, this bill has removed some protections that we had in the state, right? We have protections pertaining to long-term storage. And, we came up with some kind of you guys came up with some kind of a compromise, because the bill in its original form, as it passed in the Senate, was gonna scrape it all on. Am I right? Am I correct? It just removed the paragraph 4.
Ed, I'm gonna have to count on you to.
Yeah. So I follow this very closely. I'm very
Okay.
engaged, with this. But my question is, the bill. So right now we have some kind of a stipulation over that we have to be contacted as far as dealing with any research that ERC is going to be doing for studying nuclear energy or local storage, long-term storage. But the bill, when it passed in Senate, we haven't heard anything about it. It wasn't mentioned over here. And my question is directly to you, Mr. Chairman. You were one of the co-sponsors, if I'm correct, right?
Believe so, yes.
Yeah, you that's what I read on it. So why weren't we notified about it? I think this pertains to our work, and was it something that came about during the legislative session, or was it already in the works in November when we had our meeting?
I think, and I'm gonna make my attempt at explaining what my perspective is, and then I'll probably depend on Ed to follow up on that, or maybe Dave. When the interim energy transportation development and transmission committee met, we were up at the Dakota gasification plant where Senator Hogue was chairing that. And the concept of having a advanced nuclear energy study committee formed was brought forward with some funding to take a look at that. In order to allow for that to happen, and I don't remember if it happened at that meeting or if it came up as a follow-up discussion. The only entity in the state that was probably qualified to conduct additional research was considered the EERC and the State Energy Research Center. You know, they're the people. And there what had been previous legislation in preventing them from do that. I think when did that pass? You guys were there. Was
That was in the original bill, yes.
the original bill? 19. So that was my very first session. So in order to allow this 1025 bill, that's why I brought this forward in this order, to actually take place, then there had to be a reauthorization of what the legislature felt was the one entity that had the capacity. Actually, there was some reluctance on the part of the EERC to change that. They said, well, we've been on this path before, basically, and they didn't know if they wanted to have it on their agenda, but there was really nobody else in the state. And I'm not exactly sure of the timelines along that when all this played out, but essentially they said in order for us to be able to have 1025, we need to make some changes and that was done in the 1259 bill, or 2159, excuse me. And I don't remember, I know that when we passed to the Senate, then went over and had a lot of discussion on the House side. And that would have been, I know you were involved with that, John. I don't know which committees, if it was just in the Energy Committee.
It was, yeah.
Okay.
I was working with Chairman Porter on that. And I think the long and short of it is that, you know, in so many aspects of government, you know, I deal with human services a lot. The left hand never talks to the right hand, and I think it was an oversight that, you know, because, and I can understand the ERC's reluctance, because that's, you know, that miscommunication that occurred back in, you know, with the borehole experience.
2016, 2017.
That was, you know, that was significant.
Yeah.
And that's why this committee, you know, we wanted to be out in front of anything that's occurring in the state, so we could handle the aspects of the of what's going to occur. I think the key, when we got the bill in the House, we wanted to make sure that the work that was done with that experience wasn't lost, and that's there's one word in that in the House amendment that really prevents that. That's an above storage capability. We didn't want to stop the research for a micro reactor or these small reactors, which, you know, we were told that, you know, that would be an on-site storage situation that would not conflict with the underground storage reasoning that we were concerned about in Pierce County and the group that Merrick and I work with. And that's where we added that above ground storage piece to it. Now, in Sean's presentation, to me, I didn't get a lot of confidence that above ground storage is a permanent solution. I don't know, Dave, but you probably know more about this than I did, but that it seems like that it will last for a while, but permanent storage was not really expanded upon.
Here's what my understanding regarding storage is. Ultimately, the Department of Energy is responsible for long-term storage. And because Yucca Mountain was basically shut down, they still have not developed a long-term storage plan.
Right.
So the only options that are available out there right now for storage is on-site wherever the waste is generated. Now somebody brought that, and I don't know the answer to this, where the storage takes place for like our nuclear submarines and ships and everything like that, where that actually takes place. I don't know that answer. But right now, from a commercial standpoint or the private sector or whatever, utility side of it, it takes place only on the location where it's generated.
That is correct, but I am, the reason why I was, and I still am concerned about the bill 2159 is because, mainly because of what's happening in Texas and New Mexico. And, ERC could have gained quite a bit of money with the borehole study back then, right? I think that was after Yakima Mountain was gonna put off. I mean, it's not completely scrapped, It can still be, the project. I mean, I think Trump during his first administration, they were talking about just still putting it over there. I mean, that place is already contaminated, it's probably the best solution. And I think that, that should be the, long-term solution. But right now, they lost a case within the Supreme Court that cost them over $200 million on a technicality. And Holtec and I don't know, some other venture capital groups, they're going to be able to store nuclear waste above ground for 40 years. That's as it sits right now. So that happened in June. And I think that, our job over here is to try to prevent situations like that. So we are talking about studying something that's still way ahead. We're going to have quite a few legislative sessions. Is it something like, do we need to be the first ones to have one? Okay, we'll let Wyoming have one, first. The other thing is, why can't it be the problem solved as we get closer to it, as we know more about it? What is it going to be? How do they plan on disposing of it, as far as the SMRs are? And I don't think the SMRs are anything, that's going to happen very soon in North Dakota. I looked into, since we last talked, I know that whatever data centers are planned to be built over here, they're going to be getting power from other places, so that's already kind of figured out. So it seemed to me that it was rushed. We didn't get any input into it, this council over here. We didn't talk about it. We're basically in the dark. We found out after it passed Senate. And I think that we should kind of maybe agree on, that something like this should, if one of us knows about something like this going in, that maybe we should have a little bit of an input into it, into the language, because after all, we have people who are, connected to this subject. And so that's one thing that I wanted to say. And then, right now, from what I understand, the federal government is going to this consent, based siting. I mean, they're trying to get, work with communities and get them, so they're moving away again from a central storage to the decentralized idea of storing nuclear waste. And again, with us changing the legislation, we are opening ourselves, to more possible problems with this. I don't know, maybe there are people, who could make a little bit of money on this in the state, but is that something that we want as a state? We want to have some interim storages over here. Hopefully, borehole project is scraped. Hopefully that's not going to be coming back. But, I mean, everything carries a risk and should be studied well and should be looked into. And my kind of concern is there's a lot of private money going in, the venture capital groups and private companies, like the ones in Texas and New Mexico. And now ERC can get money from them with this bill. They can get private money, can get money from anybody. And, there's not much that we can do about it. So, opening back doors to nuclear waste, high-level nuclear waste to the state, I don't think that's a smart idea, and I don't think this was necessary right now. So that's just my comment on it. But I think we should, at least in this meeting over here, we should maybe come up with some protocol, that if some new legislation is coming in, so that we have a way to weigh in on it.
If I could maybe
Go ahead.
respond to that. So, and I mean, I certainly would take the blame for not alerting people because I thought this was really in the news. In fact, if you go back with the Energy Development Finance, or if you go back to that committee, we tried to meet with them in December of 23, was it? And they had a blizzard. It didn't happen, and because they were already moving towards that. And I thought, so that committee was for a good year and a half probably was looking at that. And I think at your meeting, maybe at the last meeting when they talked about developing legislation, Senator Hogue went right on TV. I saw him on KFYR and it was in the news. So this is quite different than the borehole. This was in the news. Maybe not everybody heard it, but it was out there. And right now, 3823, 382301 is the prohibition. That hasn't changed at all. That's still in the law. And I thought, we can debate whether, what does a study do? I looked at it and go, well, let's get some information. But, and okay, they were prohibited before from studying. It doesn't matter if it's them or somebody from out of state that comes in and does a study.
With reason.
And so, one of the things I was thinking about with this, so I assume, what could come out of this directly is that maybe in two months we have a meeting because maybe ERC comes to us and talks about what they're looking at doing for some input. The consultation, I assume, is going to be on the front end as well as during the project, during the study. So again, as we spoke during the session, I followed this, but I didn't sit in on all the meetings. I was watching. I did sit on the first one, but I just thought this is going to happen. The leadership wants it. Let's see what comes out of it. And again, as Dave knows, when we were asked on the House side for what became 3823, we were asked in Chairman Porter's committee. In fact, subcommittee was chaired by LaFleur at that time, was let's put this prohibition in there. And then our attorneys put it in there so that it wouldn't jeopardize all of 3823. If it was determined, if the state wanted to take it out in the future, or it was determined unconstitutional, if the NRC or somebody came after that can be removed without affecting the rest of that chapter. But I just think that's.
I think your concerns are appreciated, and I think the effort to address them is in item 4 listed here. Requires approval by the Industrial Commission, conducted in consultation with this group, along with the other committee that's set up in 1025. There will be a tremendous amount of public engagement through this entire process. I don't know that there was any protections that were removed from what's going on. I believe that since I've been on the committee, the intent of the committee for sure was to try to set up a process that did not allow or made it extremely difficult for the federal government to come in and introduce and store nuclear waste in North Dakota generated from someplace else. I think that was what I understood, was if it's generated someplace else, they were not going to be able to bring it in here without complying with some extremely difficult state rules and regulations. The change that's taken place has been in the tremendous power demands that are showing up all over. The aspect of the small modular reactors, and then the advent that the toxicity of the waste has been, my understanding, greatly reduced from where it was previously under what rules. They're able to generate or use more of that radioactivity in the power generation. So there's a much, much lower radioactive footprint in the waste. Now, I think that's all part of what we have to understand as we go forward. Is that true? What does that mean? Those types of things. In the other 1025, the study, so this is a frying pan and fire thing. Senator Holt called me the other day and asked me if I would be willing to chair that because he had some other things that were going to be conflicting. So I know I have both of these on my plate. Whether that was a bright move, I said yes. I don't know if that was a bright move or not, but I understand your concerns and appreciate I think there is a long pathway where there'll be a lot of public engagement as we go forward. And
it's not about, that we are against nuclear power studying it, but I believe that we should have had our hand in it as a council, and we should have had input in it. Because right now, it took tremendous amount of effort to even change it to that, and working with John over here and trying to, kind of get some protection, at least to keep the ball out of it, because there is money still available for it. And the ERC was gonna do the study without it, whatever back then. So, we know how this operates, how this works, and,
I think adding this council in on the consultation gives the protection. I think that, yeah.
Money.
I think that does give the protection though that you're looking
So
for.
is there are there any penalties for ERC if they don't come to us? They engage in, I don't know, if a private company gives them tons of money and says, well, we don't want you to talk about it, but we wanna put some internal storage here, I don't know, they can send us something in.
Well, they would be violating state law. So,
Okay. So,
which they're not going to do.
okay.
They're not like Fargo.
Okay. Ran for it. There's a lot of stuff coming out of Red lately.
I didn't say that, did I?
No, I think that the safeguards in section 4, subsection 4, it addresses the EERC's ability to do just that, Merrick. They can do it, but one of the first steps is to come to this group and the Industrial Commission, which I believe they did initially in the other, in the borehole process. That's how I heard about it, was through Industrial Commission member contacted me. But that all being said, the other piece is, I think we went as far as we could to get something passed, because there was enough interest in this that we would have lost it. And I think what we got was towards the end of what we could have expected in this last legislative session. Now that having been said, that could change next time, but with the power situation and the prospect of data centers in this state, I don't see that happening in the near future. Personally, I'd rather see a pipeline, a natural gas pipeline run through Highway 2 and power these plants through natural gas as a win-win for the state of North Dakota and our local communities. But that never seems to happen either.
Just one more last question. Are we gonna have any protocol of dealing with ERC? Is somebody gonna check in with them? Do they have to check in with us immediately after they start a project or before they start a project? How is it gonna work?
Well, I'm the one that's, if they get it completed, I'll be chairing the study, and that will be defined within that other committee, which is a legislative committee. I think I don't remember who all is on that. I should take a look at that again, but It's a legislative committee.
Bring it back up again for the other bill.
That's something that the committee can do is to drill down on the process of,
Yeah.
of
So
communication.
What,
So you-
that will be determined by that committee, what
There'll
we
be a bill
authorize.
draft in the next session.
Yeah, but it's 2 members from the energy industry appointed by legislative management, 1 by the Public Service Commission, 1 by the Industrial Commission, 1 by the Department of Water Resources. Is that going to be you, Reese?
Yes.
3 members from the House, 3 from the Senate. So that's the makeup of that committee. And my intention, which I can make that commitment right now, would be to notify this group when we're having those committee meetings, so that if you wish to log in and watch or show up in person, you'd be more than willing to. When I look at what our opportunities are related to nuclear energy in the state, I think the risk that everybody is concerned about is clearly been identified as being less than it used to be. It's not non-existent, but it is less than it used to be from the storage standpoint. So we need to know that. The other thing is that before we ever move forward with something like this, the value to the community where it takes place, if it does, has to be greater than their concern over the storage aspect, because the storage is going to be a part of that package. So that community is going to make that decision whether they believe that value of having that plant there is of great value to them, that they're willing to accept having the storage become part of it. I don't believe we're going to see, at least I have no interest in seeing, some type of a plant that comes to North Dakota so that we can provide power to Minnesota. Or wherever else. I mean, I think the benefit of the power has to benefit the state of North Dakota and the residents of the state of North Dakota. And I think that's one of my primary, Minnesota, if they feel that they need that power, then they have to build their own generation over there associated with that. Dave.
The risk of holding you back and also being a part of the church, that I have a couple questions and concerns. First of all, as it relates to your 1025 committee members, there is the only radiation control program in the state that wasn't part of that board. We have an agreement with the NRC. We regulate radioactive material, and we weren't part of it. And I do think that was the integral part of having that, just that knowledge base. And so I wasn't aware of this till the end type of deal, and then the die was cast. But I just raised that as a question. That's maybe something that could be amended in the future that really would help that overall group. Second, on the Senate 2159, this just relates to EERC, and I am a big fan of research. I'm a big fan of having the light of day of everything. If the EERC is going to get involved with that, we should know about all of that. I also know that when you look at these data centers, and we've been approached by some companies, that when you talk $5 billion, that's decimals. And so I'm more concerned about private entities coming in and doing research and how we're going to deal with that. That they have a way to look at the world that may not necessarily have the North Dakota component in there. As a committee here, I think we need to keep our eye on the ball and be very active. Not to say they can't do it, but they approach us sometimes with the mindset of Texas or some other place. And we're special in a lot of ways. And so I have some concern there. I don't have concern with 2159. Like I said, research is good. EERC is very open. We're going to know what they're going to do. I think that's good, but that doesn't preclude somebody else from coming in as a private entity.
I did talk to somebody last fall who works on nuclear energy. It was at a meeting in Salt Lake, and the comment they made is there's already the nuclear research is taking place out there all over, Idaho National Laboratory and all that. So essentially, when we're talking about research, we're not talking about nuclear research here. That's already taking place. We're talking about studying how it would work in North Dakota,
The application.
the application of it.
I agree.
And I think that's so. And I agree. I'm gonna give you a couple of examples. I was down at Ellendale at that data center here a couple of weeks ago. When they're completed, they could be spending 15 to 20 billion dollars at that data center. They're already at about 3 or 4 billion, I think. The guy told me, he said they sold their copper trimmings on their wires, and they generated $400,000 in just sales of their from the selling of the copper trimmings from the wiring in that thing. They've got 63 megawatt diesel generators on site. When we look at a data center, they're talking about 99.99, as many nines as you want to add reliability as they're concerned. They don't ever want to be down. And they also have a battery storage component that, for when they're up and running, will last 7 minutes. And those 7 minutes are for them to be able to get those 63 megawatt generators going. Those 63 megawatt generators, they have 875,000 gallons of diesel storage on site that will last them 2 days. This is the perspective that I get, because when they talk about the power demands and stuff like that, I have to put it in terms that a farm kid from Montreal County can understand. And so 875,000 gallons of diesel will last 2 days at that site.
You just, and we know about all that, and you did the diesel generators and the storage, just, that keeps me up at night, because, the air quality issues associated with it. And we have another one we proposed that's 3 times that.
Yep.
And how do you maintain air quality? My personal feeling, I'd much rather have a nuclear reactor providing electricity than 64 different diesel generators, because then when they're all running at the same time, your air quality goes to shit.
Yeah.
Go fast.
So
Excuse my
Tobacco, yeah.
that was a technical term, wasn't it?
He's in charge of wastewater too.
Okay.
It's easy. So,
Exactly, that's why.
Dan has a question online. Let's get Dan's big picture up there. Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, thank you. Listening to the conversation, I just wanted to say I agree with Representative Nelson in the concern that people had with the possibility of underground storage. Shortly after that bill passed, I took a call from a Pierce County commissioner who pretty much ran me up one side and down the other about even supporting that bill. And I explained to him what it didn't do and what its intention was for. But the perception or the fear is out there. One of the questions that came to my mind, even when Sean was talking, is we hear about temporary storage, but there is no permanent solution. So how temporary is the storage? And I guess we never get an answer to that, because there isn't an answer to it right now. Is there going to be other uses? And we're a ways off from having to worry about that. But I know that once this gets going, that's going to be an issue that is going to come up in any public meeting, is how temporary is temporary. So that's just something I wanted to add.
I agree. I think what I keep hearing is temporary/permanent, because without a permanent solution, you just better be prepared to design it for a very long haul. And to reinforce, if this actually does move forward in North Dakota, it'll be the community that says that we want to have this here because of the benefits, and then they'll also take the storage component with that. So if there's no benefit to the community and they object to it, my belief is it won't happen there.
So what is the benefit of the data centers to North Dakota? Has anyone done economic impact study, because from what I understand, and maybe I'm wrong, but the data centers are basically facilities that people build and then they rent space to different companies, right? So for that, they need a lot of energy. They want to be in North Dakota because of the cooling costs.
Mhm.
It's built by outside companies. There's no legislation forcing them to hire X amount of North Dakota contractors, right? The components and everything comes from China. And I don't know, we all heard, how they shut it down with the tariffs and they stopped building for a while. I don't know what's happening now. So what's really, is North Dakota just gonna be the provider of energy for them? And that's where the money's gonna come, just with the electricity, or, you can't put a meter on data, so,
Here's what I would say on that is, we don't always get to pick where our economic opportunity comes from. Right now, we have some very attractive things for data centers in our state. We have energy here. We have the cooling. We have, I'm going to call it relatively low land cost. We have a business-friendly environment related to
I understand why they wanna come here.
those are the things that are attractive here.
Why?
When I go back and I look at what's happened during the redistricting that took place here a few years in 2020, we saw a major shift in our population from the previous ones. We have population growth in Williston, Watford City, Dickinson. We have probably a stable to somewhat growing in Minot. We have Bismarck growing, and we have the Red River Valley corridor growing. That the rest of the state saw their districts get substantially larger. The one you're in now, John, grew quite a bit, didn't it?
Yeah, because we don't have that pipeline.
Yeah. So what we're seeing is that if these small towns in North Dakota are going to survive, or are they going to become ghost towns, they're going to have some level of opportunity that shows up. This is going to be one. The impact in Ellendale is about 350 permanent employees in a town of, 2,000 people. They're building housing there. It's going to make a difference. Now, the power that's needed to generate that is employees. Requires employees in the natural gas sector, in the coal sector, whether it's wind, it requires employees. Now, the other opportunity that comes from it is a property tax that's generated for that local community. We've had tremendous pressure on the legislature to reduce property taxes, keep them low. When you have a $15 or $20 billion in new development in a small town, that makes a difference in their property taxes. Now, the other opportunity that is out there, whether we realize it or not, we don't know, is the ability to utilize what that data center is generating. Now, that may go someplace else. A lot of it probably will go someplace else. But it's also an opportunity to say, okay, whoever's utilizing that information, maybe they want to locate something here. The door has been open to them. So is there that opportunity? Now, I don't know, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all of that just goes down a fiber optic line someplace else. There might be that opportunity. When we talk about medical research and the things that are taking place, it's not all going to be cryptocurrency. That's actually, I think, going to be a very small part of it. The quantum computing that the governor's talked about a little bit.
In today's world, it doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, but it could happen here too.
Just about servers in India.
Yeah.
That.
So
Allendale is gonna employ permanently.
I believe that they had. That's what the number I heard.
It's all about jobs.
Yeah.
That's.
We're gonna have to break for lunch because we have to call in 8 minutes to do this presentation. So.
Okay.
Can I add just a little bit? from an economic development standpoint.
Go ahead, quick.
First of all, it's all about adding value. Right now, we ship out, I don't know the percentage, but it's a very high percentage of our energy, whether it's on a pipeline or a power line or whatever. It goes out of the state and is values added downstream somewhere. Let's add the value right here, right now. Now, right now, the big user of energy is data. That's where it's at. So we can make the same argument for a soybean. Why don't we just put the soybeans on a train and ship them out of state and let somebody else add value to them? Well, no, that doesn't add value here. So we build soybean processing plants here in the state to add value to it. It's the same value stream that we want to look at for adding value to our energy streams. Right now, if we don't figure out ways to add value to our natural gas energy stream, we're going to have a lot of problems in 3 to 5 years. We can talk to Justin about that, Kringstead, about overloading our natural gas pipelines. They're at near capacity now. So, and the very best way to save small towns, the very best way for rural development is to build one heck of a big economic development project right outside of town. Let's talk to Ellendale in about a year and see what that's done for saving that little town. So that's.
We're gonna break for lunch, and we'll hold the rest of this discussion until after we get done with our presentations. We'll come back to it, though, I promise. Lunch is over here. Dakota?
Hello.
Why don't you introduce yourself? I'm Senator Dale Patton. I'm chairing the committee. Welcome to our committee, and I'll have you introduce yourself and give a little bit of background.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Dakota Kochi, and I am currently the Director of Government and External Relations at Canada's Nuclear Waste Management Organization. I'm a proud UND Bisons fan, grew up, born and raised in Manitoba, so spent summers in North Dakota, Minnesota, enjoying the fishing, enjoying the hunting, and shopping in North Dakota. So I'm very familiar with the state, and really glad to be here and presenting to you guys today. I'll get a little bit into who the NWMO is, or the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. Should I start my presentation, or?
Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to try and share here in Teams. Can you see my PowerPoint screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I already introduced myself. A little bit more about me, though. I've always worked this is my first role not working for elected officials. So I've worked for provincial, federal elected officials in Manitoba, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and obviously federal. I've done a lot of Canada-US relations. I hear that there's a lot of Canada-US discussions happening right now. So that's my background. I've been a part of a lot of legislative work in Canada, mostly related to Indigenous rights, getting major projects built with Indigenous peoples, and in the oil and gas sector, nuclear, clean and renewable sectors. So that's kind of my background. I'll get in a little bit about who the NWMO is. So here to talk to you a little bit about the NWMO. I understand you guys are looking at whether it's consent-based siting or nuclear in the state. We are the federal organization that is responsible for the long-term management of Canada's used nuclear fuel. So we're responsible for developing that plan and implementing it. We are, and I'll get into a little bit about how we're structured, but we're a not-for-profit established by the federal government. It's a little bit of a different situation in Canada compared to the US, where the US Department of Energy would otherwise hold the role of the NWMO. The federal government in Canada made the policy and legislative decision to not how the federal government administer radioactive waste management, and so they created the NWMO. We know in Canada and certainly in the US as well, nuclear energy powers our homes, businesses, and cities. Nuclear also provides life-saving medical isotopes for cancer care treatments. The radiation that you get from various cancer treatments, that's made possible due to nuclear energy. The NWMO isn't, pro-nuclear. We don't advocate for the expansion of nuclear. Our only job is to manage the existing or future waste that is created. We know that nuclear power creates a byproduct of used nuclear fuel. And after 60 years of Canada being actually 70 years of Canada benefiting from nuclear power, we have about 3.5 million bundles of used fuel. So if you stack up all of the pile of logs or the used fuel bundles, this is my Canadian reference. I'm sure you guys will appreciate it. It could fit into 9 hockey rinks from the surface of the ice to the top of the boards. So if you think about other energy forms, it's a pretty dense energy form and doesn't create a lot of waste. When we went out across Canada and engaged with Canadians and Indigenous peoples, and asked the public about what they see as priorities for radioactive waste management, the overwhelming response that we heard from Canadians is we have to deal with this liability now and not leave it for future generations. So Canada's plan will ensure, there we go. Canada's plan will ensure the safe long-term management inside a deep geological repository. I'll get into what a deep geological repository is, or a DGR, in a moment. But this plan needs to make sure that not just protects people, the actual radiation risks, but the environment as well. So not, getting into well water or the water table or, impacting agriculture, things like that. So that's something that we keep central to our plan. We were created in 2002 through an act of parliament. So we have to report to Canada's parliament, or the equivalent of Congress, on an annual basis. We report through our Minister of Natural Resources, which is the equivalent of the Secretary of Energy in the US. And I talked a little bit about our public engagement process when we were first created. It was the largest public engagement exercise in Canadian history, with over 700,000 Canadians reached in our engagement efforts. And this is where some of the radioactive waste policy differs from the US, where if you create the waste in Canada, you also pay for the waste. In the US, it's different. The liability is on US taxpayers and not on the actual company. So it's essentially ratepayers pay for the work the NWMO does. So I talked a little bit about the public engagement that we've done, but these are the major priorities that came out of our public engagement. So safety and security, not just security from an environmental perspective, but a national security, a physical security, radioactive waste, or nuclear facilities in general, obviously needs to be protected against, bad faith actors. We need to assume responsibility now in this generation, not kick the can down the way, and where projects will then become even more expensive. It needs to align with international best practice. So Canada can't just go out on its own and do, whatever we think. There has to be some sort of international consensus. And the approach must be adaptable, because technology, can adapt in the future. Maybe reprocessing and recycling becomes more of a reality in Canada. Maybe we find better uses for the used fuel in the future. So it needs to be adaptable, and we need to make sure that we're able to adapt to those changes. And you'll hear the word adaptive quite a bit. It's because we call our plan adaptive phase management. There's a number of phases, and we need to make sure that we're responding to technical advances, Indigenous knowledge, public input, best practices, public policy changes, legislative changes, evolving societal expectations and values, and even the things we had not anticipated yet, such as pandemics or other global events happening. So now that you have a better understanding of the plan the NWO is responsible for, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we are. We have a big team, over 300 staff and employees who are scientists, engineers, knowledge holders, most importantly, neighbors. I do not have a PhD, but we quite literally have people who have double PhDs. I feel very stupid speaking to some of my colleagues, but we have the best and the brightest nuclear scientists, nuclear experts, geologists, environmental experts here at the NWMO, and we're really proud of that. What we believe in, safety, integrity, excellence, collaboration, accountability, transparency. And then in the middle here, we have Indigenous knowledge and reconciliation. So in Canada, the environment is a little bit different in terms of the policy and legislative framework that we operate in. But if you want to get a major project built in Canada, such as this repository, or doesn't matter what type of major project, you need to have buy-in from the local Indigenous communities. That is right in our laws. It's not just a matter of consultation or anything. And we're seeing a lot of the time where Indigenous communities are actually buying up equity of some of the projects. We're a not-for-profit organization, so we don't have equity to provide, but it's quite a different policy framework here in Canada, where it's actually the Indigenous communities who are investing in some of these major projects. I talked a little bit about this, but in 2018, the NWO released a reconciliation statement with Indigenous peoples, acknowledging historical wrongs in Canada's past and how we'll work together. And then in 2019, a first in North America, we took an important step by formalizing a reconciliation policy that outlines our commitments to Indigenous peoples. So we talked a little bit about who we are, what we do, but to talk a little bit about the science itself. This is an example of what a deep geological repository looks like. You'll see where it has A there, that's the surface facilities, and then everything else underneath is what is under the ground. So I don't have an example from a North Dakota's perspective, but it's essentially going to be the depth of about 500 to 700 meters, essentially the height of the CN Tower in terms of depth, and all the used fuel will be housed underneath in the ground. And the U.S. does have versions of repositories operating in the U.S. right now. One is the WIP, which is a D&D facility for the U.S. military's defense-related radioactive waste. The U.S. is pursuing eventually a DGR as well, but I think the DOE is more focused on interim storage at the moment rather than a permanent facility. But this is essentially what it looks like. The fuel bundles you'll see there is different from what U.S. used fuel looks like. We are a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I mean, the U.S. is as well, but we do not enrich any of our uranium. So all of our nuclear power in Canada is non-enriched fuel. So the fuel looks different, fuel operates different, but that is what our used fuel or our fuel bundles look like. It is then put in the used fuel container, put into bentonite boxes, backfilled with bentonite clay, and all those different barriers from the fuel bundle to the used fuel container to the bentonite clay and the rock provides that multi-layer protection against any type of incursions or breaches. Now in Canada, our fuel is a solid. It is a rock. You mine it in Saskatchewan. It's processed in Ontario. It is not a liquid. It is not, is a solid. So it doesn't leak into the water. It doesn't, it's not a liquid. It doesn't spill. So our facility is built in a way that contains our specific types of fuel. A little bit about community partnership. As a national infrastructure project with over $5 billion of construction costs over a 10-year period, this project will obviously create thousands of high-value jobs. And even, the construction, the capital costs is $5 billion, but over the course of the project, this is a project that is operational for over 175 years. It's a total cost of about $26 billion. And so some of the economic benefits will include, and I'll talk a little bit about the sites specific, but will obviously include hiring from the local communities, investments into local infrastructure, community well-being, sponsorships, donations, things like that. And some of the things that we're working on is providing opportunities for education for some of the siting communities that we work with, so that youth in the communities can pursue a career in STEM, stay in their home community, make good money in a unionized job, and stay in their community with their family. And so that's something that's particularly attractive for communities. So you may ask me, how the hell do you guys cite a waste facility? Obviously it's controversial, or it can be controversial, but from the beginning we committed that we are only proceeding in an area with informed and willing hosts, where the municipality, the First Nations, and the Métis communities are working together to implement it. So if the communities were to say, no, we do not want to host a repository, we were prepared to honor that position and not cite a repository in that territory, because we know something as controversial as a nuclear waste repository, we need to make sure that the community is bought into hosting a repository. So we conducted a site selection process where 22 communities, we went out across Canada and asked municipalities and Indigenous communities across the country to raise their hand to learn more about hosting a repository. 22 communities raised their hands to say that they're interested in learning more. And through a narrowing down process that included technical studies, that included social assessments, we narrowed it down to 2 different sites. Now, end of last year, we ended up selecting Wabigoon Lake, Ojibwe Nation, and the Ignis area, which is the #1 figure there on the map. It's northwestern Ontario. It's as opposed to the other final site, which is the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation area, South Bruce, which is in southwestern Ontario. And so both communities, Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation, which is the local First Nation or the Indian Reserve, and Ignis, which is the local municipality, both held referendums. Ignis voted 77% in favor, with over 90% turnout, which is pretty unheard of in referendums or elections. And Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation, while they didn't release their figures, the chief publicly in the media said that the figure was higher than Ignis's A, turnout, and B, support level. So we felt very confident that we had the support in the local area to proceed with Wabigoon and Ignis. I should say as well, we're now proceeding kind of in the next steps of the project. So we announced the site in November of last year, in 2024. And we're now working towards submitting our regulatory submissions later this year. Over the next 2 decades, we'll be working on our transportation planning framework and transportation plan. And in Canada and around the world, there has not been a single issue with the transportation of used fuel where there has been an impact on the environment or on human safety. And so for over 50 years, there have been more than 25,000 shipments of used nuclear fuel worldwide, including Canada and the US, and none have caused harm to people or the environment due to the release of radioactive materials. So what's next? So I mentioned that we selected a site in 2024. You will get a sense to see how long the Canadian regulatory process is here. I know that there's certainly some work being done on that, but 2025, this year, will begin the regulatory process. We don't expect the regulatory process to end before 2033, where that construction begins. But in the meantime, we'll be building a center of expertise, which will house our head office, which will house our local offices, and will also be a community of center of sorts for the community as well. We've committed, our head office right now is in Toronto. I'm based out of Ottawa just because I do government relations. But our entire head office and our executive staff, part of the commitment to the communities is we're moving our entire head office to Ignis, Ontario, which is a town right now of about 1,200 people during the summer because it's cottage country, and probably about 700 during the winter. So it'll be quite a big shift in dynamic for the municipality, but it's something that we've committed to as part of the benefits. Operations will begin in the mid-2040s, with post-operations beginning in 2088. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I can certainly answer, basic questions about, nuclear. I'm not a nuclear scientist. I'm not a geologist, but I can answer the high-level questions for sure. And I'm also happy to go back and get answers for anyone. The one thing maybe I should say that's not part of the presentation is the NWMO works with the U.S. Department of Energy. We signed a memorandum of understanding with the DOE to share best practices about consent-based siting, to share best practices of radioactive waste. Canada's I don't think it's even subjective, but Canada is much further ahead of the U.S. in terms of a plan for managing its radioactive waste. And so we have regular conversations with the U.S. Department of Energy about any advice that they have. We've looked at staff exchanges, things like that. But Canada, in terms of global leaders, Finland is definitely in the lead in terms of their pursuit of a deep geological repository. They have one built. They're waiting just for final regulatory approval to actually emplace the used fuel. But countries like Switzerland, France, and Canada are kind of in second place in terms of advancements of a DGR. So happy to answer any questions, and thanks for having me.
We have a couple of questions from Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dakota, thank you for your presentation, first of all. And my first question is, in the areas that voted to accept the nuclear waste potential sites, the area, how close to a populated area would these it appears to me like this is a borehole that we were envisioning in my legislative district back in 2017.
Yeah, the next biggest municipality is Dryden, Ontario, and I think they only have about 50,000 residents. So it's a pretty remote part of Ontario. It is close to the Trans-Canada Highway, which is obviously a very busy highway. But by and large, it's a very not very populated area.
Okay. My other question is, do you distinguish in Canada between the low level in our country? We're talking about storage on site, and then the high level storage that I would understand to be part of this. Do you have a distinction between those two, or how do you handle that lower level, smaller reactor type waste?
So the NWMO is responsible for uh, intermediate level waste, high level waste, and any other waste that we produce as a result of the production of the facility or the processing of our waste. So uh, essentially anything that comes out of a reactor or is part of a reactor that the NWMO is responsible for. So any types of novel fuels or we don't have reprocessing or recycling in Canada, but any type of fuels that come out of that would be the responsibility of the NWMO. But low level waste, which is like mop handles, papers that are in a reactor and in a nuclear facility, that's the responsibility of the individual waste owners. So a lot of the time, you can actually just either incinerate or and store for a number of years. There's a lot of waste reduction technologies in Canada, but essentially the NW was responsible for all of the long-lived radioactive material in Canada. So it's a little bit different as well in the US versus Canada, where the DOE is only responsible for the high-level waste, and kind of leaves industry to deal with the intermediate and low-level waste.
Okay, I was more, I guess I should have extended it better. I didn't mean the T-norm type stuff, but those smaller reactors that in our country or in our state, what they're talking is storing the waste on site with really, as I understand it, no permanent solution to pass that. And I'm wondering, is that the strategy that you use in Canada, or do you
No.
would that be deposited deep into the earth like you're with all the others?
Yeah, so even like if, for example, if we were responsible for radioactive waste in the US, in Canada, we would be responsible for that waste. So I don't want to comment on US policy, but we have a responsible owner for every single piece of radioactive waste in Canada, with a permanent plan for every single piece of radioactive waste in Canada. So future reactors, doesn't matter if they're developed, doesn't matter if they're proposed, doesn't matter if they're how small or how big, the NWMO is responsible for. So the onus is on the NWMO to develop a plan. So for example, if we were working with a proponent that was looking to build maybe something similar to what you were developing, the proponent of that reactor would have to pay essentially a fair share of what it would cost to manage the radioactive waste that they're preparing. And then we would be responsible for the transportation out of the state or out of the province to the centralized repository. And there's probably an element of where the used fuel would have to be there for a short period of time. More from a logistics standpoint, because you can't all of a sudden send trucks, and you can't all of a sudden, engineer the used fuel containers overnight for, novel different types of fuel. But the NWMO would be responsible for fuel like what you're describing.
Thank you. Any further questions for Dakota? Dave.
Dave, I appreciate your presentation. Is there any monetary compensation to the local government that accepts this, and how long does that contract last?
The contract lasts throughout all of operations. So the contracts right now with the municipality and the First Nation is public as well. So we made sure that the agreements are public because they are ratepayer dollars that we're working with. The deal that we have with Ignis is I forget the exact figure, but it's between 150 million and 200 million dollars over the life cycle of the contract, keeping in mind that we're responsible for the infrastructure, we're responsible for a lot of the emergency services, and things like that. So there's obviously costs on top of that that benefit the local taxpayer base. But in terms of direct transfers from the NWMO to the municipality, it's about 175 million. And what I'll say is the agreement with the local First Nation is not public due to their decision not to publicize it. But I will say it's one of the biggest, the largest deals with an Indigenous community in North America. Obviously just because of our need to get consent and support from the local First Nation, but it's over the course of the entire project.
Any further questions? How long are the contracts?
I'd have to get the exact numbers, but it's between 175 and 180 years.
Okay, so $1 million a year?
Yeah, and it's mostly paid out at milestones. So for example, when we submit our regulatory submissions later this year, they get a specific amount. When we get regulatory approval, they get a specific amount. They get a small amount year by year, mostly to ensure that the municipality has capacity for staff and things like that. But the large chunks of funding are based off of milestones.
Okay,
So it's not necessarily like 175 million divided by 175, each year. It's really based off of milestones.
Any further questions? Dave?
Once the useful life of that repository is done, who in perpetuity keeps track of it or monitors it? Does that go over to the locals, or does your organization, do they do that?
Yeah, we are responsible for from cradle to grave. With that as well, there's backstopping from the federal government. So let's say in 175 years, the NWO ceases to exist. It's still the responsibility of the federal government to manage the site. So if there ever was an issue in, let's say, 200 years, it is the federal government's responsibility to manage that. And we have legislation that backstops all nuclear projects in Canada and affirms the Crown's role in managing nuclear projects after its normal life cycle.
Any questions? Yeah.
Dakota, Ed Murphy, do you have a requirement then for marking it at the surface for future generations that once the site's shut down, that it still has some kind of permanent marker?
Yeah, we are one of the only organizations or the type of work that we plan for ice ages. Scientists, say that there's going to be another ice age in 60,000 years. Canada values its relationship with the US, and we hope that, Canada and the US relationship will remain strong. But we have no idea where our society will be in 100, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, or 60,000 years, or even if English is a predominant language in the world. So we are planning hieroglyphics, big signs that, any type of advanced intelligence may be able to understand that doesn't use any particular language. We're looking at putting obviously English and Mandarin and, other major languages in the world as part of the signage, but we do plan for what happens in 100,000 years or 75,000 years if someone were to start mining for resources or start digging or settling there, because we have no idea what society looks like.
So Dakota, what you're telling us in about 60,000 years when that ice age hits, the US is going to have to strengthen their border security a little bit?
I'm not gonna wade into that. I'll let you honorable senators deal with that yourself. But yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, we very much appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, we are more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Dakota.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Let's move on to our 12:45. We're actually at 12:45, so we are on track right now. Interest expressed by industries with high energy needs is a group discussion. We're going to start off with Rich Garman from Commerce Department, and then follow up with Dave. Rich?
Yes, thank you, Senator Pat. I'm gonna get to the right notes here. As I told Ed in an email, I am bound a little bit by some NDA, so I won't get into the weeds a whole lot, but just general industry trends. We already discussed data. One thing I want to point out though on data that it's been beaten into my head by some of my friends down in Ellendale. There is a massive difference between data and crypto. The energy needs are very different. The reliability needs are very different. Really, the only similarity is they both use a computer at the end of the day to get their job done. So we should really approach them with two very different perspectives. They both have value. They both have a spot in the economic development landscape, but they're very different from one another. And I just want to make sure that we always understand that when we throw crypto and data together, that's really doing them both a disservice. And so I want to kind of make sure that we always keep them clearly separated from each other because they are. And by far, data is the biggest dollars. I mean, if you use the term decimal dust, Dave, I like that. That's
We had those from legislators.
that's an impressive term. I like that.
With your budget, would we talk?
That's Commerce's budget. No, I'm just kidding. The budgets of these projects start with B's. They don't start with M's anymore. Typically, crypto ones are more in the millions, high millions, high hundreds of millions to maybe very low billions. The data projects start in the billions and move up from there. I had just kind of convinced myself to understanding what a million was, maybe 10 million, and now we're going to billions. It's hard to wrap your head around what a billion of something is, but that's where those budgets are. And I do want to kind of point that out, that crypto and data are very different. Reliability standpoint, from reliability of energy, like Senator Patton said, data requires, I think the term I heard is 5 nines of reliability, so 99.999% of the time. You multiply that out over 365 days, 24 hours a day. It's a handful of seconds per year that they can afford to be down, and even then they don't want to be down that much. Crypto is very different. Crypto will manage their times based upon power prices and everything else. That's actually a very novel use of crypto is being used up at Rainbow Energy right now, where they actually use crypto mining facilities to manage their off-peak loads. If they have extra power, rather than shut the units down or reduce load on the units, they can shunt that power out into the parking lot. Well, that's a parking lot, into the lot that they have their crypto facilities built and do the work out there. So very different. I just wanted to point that out up front. Data, to say it's a blur now is probably an understatement. I mean, there is so much happening in data right now, and it's happening so fast. We were getting calls several a week. We probably have been reduced now to maybe a handful a month, which is still a lot. We're probably, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm just thinking, what kind of hands do you have? But 5, 6, 7, 8 calls a month on major data projects. And we're not the only ones getting them. A lot of the data companies are going directly to the utilities. In fact, that's probably their preferred mode of operation. They're going straight to the utilities. They're talking to a lot of the bigger EDOs directly, like the Grand Forks, the Fargos, the Minots. They're going directly to them, and that's fine. We don't have a problem with that. But so what I'm reporting as numbers are just what Commerce is seeing, and then all of our partners out there are also seeing a big influx as well that doesn't necessarily overlap with each other. Same ideas, but to try to summarize it. Data centers, a small or a medium size ask is probably 200 to 600 megawatts of power. I believe that Ellendale is just a little over 600 when they're built out to where all their phases are approved right now. I think they'll be at like 660 or some number like that, which is a lot of energy. That's a lot of power. If you figure right now the state produces about little over 3,000 megawatts of power, Ellendale is going to be consuming 600 plus. So that's fifth, 20%.
In comparison, Coal Creek Station is about 1,100.
11, yeah.
1,100
Very good
megawatt
comparison.
power plant.
So they're going to want about half.
And that's the biggest power plant we have in the state.
Yes.
That's a couple of units, isn't it? It's like one unit.
It's like two 650s, yeah.
Yeah.
So that, and I get net and gross because it takes energy to make energy. Anyway, so basically the Ellendale project wants one of the units of Coal Creek to supply. I mean, that's not true. That's not a headline, but the equivalent production of one of the units of Coal Creek is approximately what the Ellendale project's going to use. So that's a lot of
There's an
power.
additional point just on demand, if I can interrupt.
Absolutely, sir.
Basin Electric is in the process of citing and approving a combined generation gas power plant northeast of Williston that will be over 1,400 megawatts. It's two different, there's two of them. So that's bigger than Coal Creek.
Right. The megawatt output will surpass Coal Creek by a bit.
Yeah.
But the need is there. We asked maybe earlier, why data? Because that's a great way to add value to a commodity that we can effectively produce in the state. We can effectively produce energy, whether it's through natural gas, oil, coal, whatever that answer is. We're really good at producing energy in the state, and data is a big user of that energy. There's another alternative. We could build all the power here, build a whole lot of power lines, next to impossible, and then ship it to South Dakota or Minnesota or something like that, much like we've done in the past, and let them build the data centers there. But why? Let's collect that here and add that value here. So for those average size facilities, sort of like the Ellendale, and they would kill me if I said that's an average size facility because it's massive. If you've ever been in it, I've been in a lot of power plants in my life. I spent 30 years working in power plants. That facility is as impressive or more impressive than any power plant I've ever been in, just by its sheer size. So there are some smaller ones out there. So anyway, 200 to 600 megawatts. I would say there's a couple of dozen that are shopping the state right now between utilities, local economic development agencies, and the Department of Commerce, and probably others. They're shopping right now, looking for the best spot. The best spot has been found. That's Applied Digital, and the spot that they found down by Ellendale. They kind of found a sweet spot in the power grid. First mover advantage, I guess you'd call that. They did that, and they're taking advantage of that they can actually be supplied by grid power and then backed up by diesel. They're not building any of their own generation on site other than their backup generation. They're not building new generation to just power that. At least that's not the plan that I've heard of to date. One of the reasons is they don't have natural gas. They don't have an effective way to create that generation in an effective manner. So what's the next answer? We need more generation to attract more data. We have plenty of energy in the state. We don't have plenty of electricity in the state. And so we have to convert that energy into electricity. And the best way that we can do that is, like Senator Patton said earlier, Basin's building a 1,400 megawatt combustion turbine set up near Williston. That is the quickest, most effective way to do it. Now, if there's plans to build new coal, if there's plans to build nuclear, those are all additional. Those are all great long-term plans. The fastest energy to market is probably combined cycle. The absolute fastest is probably simple cycle, which is once through. You burn the gas through a big jet engine, spins the generator, makes electricity, and you exhaust very hot gas. The more efficient way to do that is to use a combined cycle, which puts a heat collector on the back side of that exhaust and collects that heat off that gas. And so you get more megawatts per cubic foot of natural gas.
Then makes steam, which then runs another generator.
Absolutely. You grab that heat on the back end, which is a very common process. A lot of combustion turbines do that right now. It's not new technology, but it's speed over over the right engineering solution. And so whichever happens there. There are some small entities out there that we've talked to. They're kind of in the, not an expert here, but in the world of edge computing. They call it edge. Yeah, edge computing. So very small processing facilities that might process agricultural data. If you're going to do drone data, you're going to take crop data off of a field. Do we really need that to go to a major processing center somewhere, or can that happen reasonably locally at a smaller data processing center? There's opportunities being looked at like that. I know for sure, like in and around the Fargo area, there's stuff being looked at there. Maybe hospital data. Maybe they don't want to get out on the big network. Maybe they want to stay more local, smaller. So a lot of data. Then there's the massive sites. There's the 1,000 megawatt plus sites. We've had at least 5 or 6 knocks on the door for those. And those are the ones that would like take the entire consumption of a Coal Creek plus some. They start at 1,000 megawatts and go up in multiples of gigawatts. I thought that was only in Back to the Future, but gigawatts, 1 gigawatt, 2 gigawatts, and those reach thousands of megawatts. That's very unrealistic right now.
How many gigawatts are produced in North Dakota right now?
3,000 gigawatts.
Gigawatts.
3. There's 3,000 megawatts. So, yeah. So
3 gigawatts.
And that's not an uncommon ask by some of the biggest, baddest centers out there. Is 3 gigawatts is not out of their asking range. So they want every megawatt made in North Dakota. Obviously, very impractical, not going to happen. A lot of those gigawatts being produced right now are spoken for by contracts downstream and everything else. Minnesota would go black for the most part if we sold all of our megawatts. So we got to continue recruiting all their businesses over here first before we let them go black. So anyway, lots of data stuff happening. And again, nothing official here, but what I hear too is that the window on data is everybody's going to find a dance partner here in the next 18 to 36 months. And we may be the best site geographically. We may be the best site from a climate standpoint. They love cool climate. We may have reliable energy, but if we can't plug those all together, they're going to go with the next best and the next best and the next best eventually, because they have to build. They're not going to wait for us forever. Probably our biggest holdup right now would be enough megawatts or gigawatts available on their time frame. And that's, if we're talking about a natural gas pipeline being built, that's not going through your county, as I've heard a couple times. Yet. Fair. That's a good answer. That's a great start. That's a great start, because now that can move that gas, which is the energy that we need to convert to electricity. We can move that gas into many different locations, where we can encourage more development, such as the development Basin's doing up in Williston. We could spread that across the entire state, then from Watford City-ish area to Castleton-ish area. Use the ish there a lot, but
I like referring.
Yeah, it just spreads it out. You're not specific there. So anyway, data needs energy. We have a lot of energy. Well, data needs electricity. We have a lot of energy. And I know we're working hard to figure that out. We've actually got an RFP right now from an electric independent operator, electric company, that's asking for suggestions in the state of where to build potential energy electricity development. Know nothing more about it right now. We got it over the weekend, but there's a lot of interest now. That part of the puzzle is filling in, is that there's a recognized need to make electricity, and it's slowly getting solved. But we don't have forever, but we want to do it right too. So data, lots of stuff going on in data. I don't know exactly where it's going to land right now, but I know we're going to land with a lot of them. Ellendale, they're going to be booming. I told the mayor of Ellendale, I said his biggest problem might be that they can't play Class B basketball anymore. They might get moved up a league. And I learned that Class B basketball towns get very worked up about that. So I quit talking about that with the mayor.
That one off,
yeah, I don't talk about that anymore. The other big projects that are out there that are actually gaining some traction are ore processing plants. You've seen a lot in the news about Talon. They took title to a facility over by Beulah, the Westmoreland facility over by Beulah. So they're moving forward.
Explain that a little further.
I will. Talon Metals is a company that is going to mine nickel ore, and by default, copper ore will come up with the nickel ore. And they're going to process it in North Dakota. They will mine it, crush it in Minnesota, and then rail it to North Dakota. One of the reasons they need to rail it to North Dakota is part of their final process requires fly ash to stabilize their final byproduct. We don't call it the waste word, byproduct. And then with that fly ash, they looked at either going through the permitting process in Minnesota or the permitting process in North Dakota. And Dave's crew is much easier to get along with than
Hard to imagine.
Hard to imagine. And so they committed 2.5 years ago, probably, to building in North Dakota. They shopped around a while looking for a spot. They landed on that site over by Beulah, and they're moving ahead. They had a big signing ceremony over there about a month ago. So they're moving forward. And kind of the sleeper out there, we have an iron ore processing facility that, interestingly, called us the day after the press releases were released on the nickel mining project. They're doing a similar yet different project in Minnesota where they're going to actually pick up the ore. What do you call it, Dave?
Tailings.
Tailings. Thank you. That's a good name for it. The ore tailings in Minnesota that have been left there for 100 years of mining operation on the Iron Range. Again, they'll crush it over there. I think they magnetically separate it and then load it in a train, bring it over to North Dakota. Why? Because we have abundant, reliable energy, both in the form of natural gas, which they need a lot of, and electricity, which they need a significant amount of. They need a few hundred megawatts, and they need about a quarter BCF of gas, which is about 1/6 of the projected excess capacity of natural gas that we'll have in the next 7 to 10 years. So it's a major dent in the natural gas extra that we'll have. So they're working hard. They haven't officially announced their location yet. If you know it, you know it. If you don't, you don't. I probably shouldn't release it without it being released publicly yet, but it's in the central corridor of North Dakota where they're going to build. And they'll have a lot of natural gas, and they'll need a fair amount of electricity. So they did tell me that they've closed their first round of funding, that they achieved their first round, which is a small step towards the billions of dollars they'll need to build the project, but it's a first step. So they'll be able to get all their engineering done and stuff now with their first phase of engineering here. So ore processing, not something you'd normally think of in North Dakota, but fairly energy intensive. They'll both need hundreds of megawatts. And then dozens of peripheral options as well. I don't want to stop like at the iron ore plant. I don't want to stop at iron ore ingots, put them back on a train car and send them to Indiana or wherever. What's the next step of processing that iron ore? It's going to be processing it into steel. And then what's the next step between processing it into steel is processing it into some usable product made out of steel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the projects that are out there right now. And then the downstream projects from the ones that we are courting. To be fair, data, what's the downstream industry of data? And we might be there. That might be the downstream industry. I don't know that there's an extra downstream industry other than the fact that we may locate corporate headquarters here and a few other things, but that's where we're at. One interesting project, not highly energy intensive, but very, it's taking a waste product that's being handled right now and pumped into saltwater disposal wells. We went out and observed it out in Dunn County. They're extracting lithium from the saltwater waste from wells at a saltwater disposal well to fairly great success right now, and they're moving forward. It's the Wellspring Hydro Project. They're pulling lithium out of saltwater right now, so they've got a ways to go, but they have a field trial set up, and they're pulling the lithium out, which rolls back into the energy world because lithium is a product to build batteries. So is nickel, so is iron. So we're kind of slowly developing all those feedstocks for this long-term energy-centric market. So I didn't even start on ag, but they're not usually quite as electric-centric. So, but any questions?
Any questions for the-
What's the likeliness of any of these to really happen? So
Fair question.
I've been around this world for a while and
Yeah, me too.
you and I have had a lot of discussions on stuff and it's still, yeah, we're working on it.
You know, that's what I didn't talk about, but,
I know.
I would say there, you know, we had a short time where we had Al Anderson as a deputy commissioner. He was the commissioner, obviously, deputy commissioner. And he imprinted on my forehead very hard, probability versus impact chart, you know, to draw a little graph and how probable is it versus how big is the impact. And so he made me think in probability and impact. And so let's go iron ore. I mean, probability has probably been growing. It's probably getting close to the 50% line. And in the economic development world, that's pretty high. I mean, that's pretty high. Impact will be huge. So that drives that number up a bit because that'll be a major energy user and a major gas user. So that's when we have a lot of faith in. The nickel one of the risks involved on the nickel one is they have to yet receive